Imagine a killer who doesn't hide in the shadows, because no one is looking at him in the first place. Not because he's smart, not because he's charming, but because he's invisible. This is the story of a man who blended in so well that he hunted for decades while living a life that looked painfully ordinary. Stay with me, because this case isn't about mystery at first. It's about neglect. In the early 1980s, women began disappearing in and around Seattle, Washington. Runaways, sex workers, teenagers on the margins. At first, their absence barely registered. No headlines, no urgency, no national panic. They were written off as people who had simply drifted away. Then the bodies were found. Along the Green River. In forests. Dumped like they didn't matter. Strangled. Discarded. Repeatedly. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone was hunting women, and he was patient. Fear grew quietly, not because everyone felt threatened, but because the victims were always the same type. Young, vulnerable, unprotected. And that made the response slower. Because when society decides some lives matter less, killers get time. The police launched one of the largest investigations in US history. Hundreds of suspects. Thousands of tips. Years of surveillance. But the killer stayed free. Because the man responsible didn't look like a monster. He was married, held steady jobs, went to church, drove trucks, talked politely. He was exactly the kind of person people trust. His name was Gary Ridgway. And at this point, no one was paying attention to him at all. Because the scariest killers aren't always the smartest. They're the ones society refuses to see. While investigators searched for someone dangerous, the real threat was standing right in front of them, completely unnoticed. What made Ridgway dangerous wasn't intelligence. It was repetition. He learned early that he could target women no one was protecting and get away with it. Every time he succeeded, his confidence grew, not in himself as a person, but in the system's failure to stop him. And that realization was intoxicating. Ridgway's inner world was simple and disturbing. He didn't see his victims as people. He saw them as objects to control, to dominate, to erase. Strangulation wasn't random. It was deliberate. It gave him power. It gave him time. It reinforced the fantasy that he was in complete control. After killing, he often returned to the bodies. Not out of guilt. Not out of panic. Out of ownership. He revisited dump sites, rearranged remains, and relived the moment repeatedly. The crime didn't end when the victim died. It stayed alive in his mind. What's chilling is how ordinary he remained. He went to work the next day, spoke casually with coworkers, attended church, blended into routine. There were no breakdowns, no confessions, no dramatic mistakes. Just consistency. Here's the uncomfortable question. How dangerous is someone who realizes they can kill and still live a normal life? At this stage, Ridgway wasn't afraid of being caught. He was refining his process. Learning which areas worked, which victims were ignored, which mistakes didn't matter. As long as society continued to look away, he had all the time in the world. The killings didn't slow down. They escalated. By the mid-1980s, the truth was impossible to ignore. Bodies kept surfacing, sometimes months apart, sometimes years later. The Green River, forests, and remote highways became graveyards. With every discovery, the scale of what was happening grew darker. Investigators realized this wasn't a handful of murders. It was dozens. The killer wasn't stopping. He wasn't changing locations out of panic. He was methodical, and that terrified law enforcement. Victims were identified slowly, if at all. Many had no one searching for them. Some were never reported missing. Others were identified only through fragments, clothing, jewelry, memories. The silence around their lives became part of the crime. Police made mistakes. They focused on the wrong suspects, relied on limited forensic tools, underestimated how ordinary the killer looked. Ridgway was interviewed multiple times. He passed polygraphs, gave DNA samples that couldn't yet be fully analyzed, and walked away without suspicion. The monster shook hands with detectives and went home. The investigation dragged on for years. The trail went cold. The public slowly forgot, but the killer didn't. He adapted. The violence slowed, not because he felt remorse, but because he learned how to disappear even better. For years, the case sat in limbo. The task force dissolved. Funding dried up. Leads went stale. To the public, the Green River Killer felt like a nightmare from another time. To Ridgway, it felt like victory. He didn't change his life. He kept working, kept marrying, kept attending church. He even talked about the murders with co-workers, casually expressing disgust toward the killer, knowing no one would imagine the truth. That confidence was absolute. What finally changed everything wasn't a confession. It was science. By the late 1990s, DNA technology had advanced. Old evidence was re-examined. Samples that were once useless suddenly had meaning. One name resurfaced. This time, the DNA didn't lie. The genetic material matched multiple victims. Years of silence collapsed in an instant. In 2001, Ridgway was arrested. No chase. No resistance. No emotion. Just quiet inevitability. What came next shocked even seasoned investigators. Ridgway didn't deny it. He cooperated. Why do some killers talk once they're finally caught? Because what he revealed next changed the case forever. The murders investigators knew about were only part of the story. Once he started talking, the case transformed from horrifying to almost incomprehensible. He didn't brag. He didn't dramatize. He listed names, locations, methods, detached and methodical, as if describing routes he used to drive. Ridgway ultimately confessed to 48 murders, though investigators believe the real number is higher. Some victims were never found. Some were never identified. Some were forgotten long before they were killed. That was part of why he succeeded for so long. He chose people society had already decided not to protect. In exchange for cooperation and leading police to remains, Ridgway avoided the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For many, the deal felt wrong. Too merciful. But for families, answers mattered more than revenge. What haunted detectives most wasn't just the body count. It was how normal he was. No genius. No master plan. Just a man who realized indifference was his greatest weapon. The Green River Killer case exposed how slowly society reacts when victims are marginalized, how killers exploit silence, and how ordinary can be the most dangerous disguise of all.